I would like to give immediately the floor to the first speaker, who should not take more than 5 minutes. Unfortunately, this is what we agreed, and who is Andreas Molin from the Federal Ministry of Environment of Austria. Andreas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I would really like to express my appreciation that the meeting of the parties, the signatories to this convention, and the Secretariat picked up the issue. I mean, we didn't know when this process started that it would be so timely in the light of Fukushima, but now it's a very good time to talk about that. I will not talk about nuclear as such today. I'll strictly keep to environmental impact assessment procedures. My government's policy is very simple. Unless adverse transboundary impacts can be deterministically excluded, we take part in any environmental impact assessment procedure or strategic environmental assessment regarding nuclear installations or nuclear programs. A few years ago, we had a debate if we should follow a probabilistic approach, and as Fukushima told us, we were very wise not to do so. Yeah, it worked. There are two key messages I would deliver to you. First of all, yes, severe accidents should be part of the environmental impact assessment procedure, and the full scope of the process from the screening over the notification and the IA documentation. In what detail that is done depends very much on the way the environmental impact assessment procedure is done in a specific country. I mean, we have a dilemma. If we do it early, we don't know many details about the project. If we do it late, it's more difficult to influence a decision. But this is the dilemma of the environmental impact assessment as such, and not specific to nuclear. But to the extent possible, to the extent achievable in a certain stage of the procedure, we are convinced that dealing with severe accidents in the term of the IAEA terminology, that means really large releases of radioactive substances should be covered. A second key message from our experience is that yes, alternative options should be covered, and not only alternatives in the design of a reactor, for example, or the size of a reactor, but also in alternatives in providing the electricity, or maybe even in saving the electricity. I know that this is a strong challenge, but I think it's important in terms of an overall energy policy to see also the alternatives, and of course to cover also the so-called zero option, that is the alternative to do nothing, and to see the advantages but also the disadvantages of this zero option. And then there are, from our experience, three key challenges. One is not very specific to nuclear, but maybe in the nuclear field it's more important than in other fields. That is transparency versus security. People, in particular the general public, is very interesting to know a lot of details about a specific plant or specific installations. And some of these technical details simply cannot be displayed because they touch somehow on security issues or intellectual property rights or things like that. To strike the right balance for that is an extremely challenging thing. I can tell you from my own experience as the chair of the Transparency Working Group of NSREC, that's the European Nuclear Regulators Group, and we're working on that, and we have no solution yet. So if we're looking for support from the convention, maybe you have a good idea how to deal with that. The second key challenge, in particular with nuclear power plants, is, so to say, the cutoff or not cutoff of the front end and the back end of the fuel cycle. How far do you go? And that, again, is varying very much from country to country, and it would be certainly advisable to have some kind of guidelines, recommendations, or whatever, how to deal with that. And then the third challenge, in our experience, and we had a lot of problems with that, are simply administrative issues. For example, the language issue. If a procedure in national law giving, I don't know, 3 months for the whole procedure, and then have a transboundary procedure where you need at least 3 to 4 weeks to translate the documentation, if it's not in a language which is communicable, then you're really into troubles, in procedural troubles, and there is no recommendation whatsoever, neither in the convention nor in the EU Union directive, so there's something to be dealt with. Closely related to that is the question of national scheduling versus the time needed for international communication. It's not done that you have the same period of publishing a document. You have the transferring the document of translation, you're distributing nationally, etc., etc. So it adds up weeks and weeks and weeks to the procedure, and there is no clear guidance on that. And of course, a very important question also is having or having not public hearings in the potentially affected country, not only in the country of origin, but also in the potentially affected countries. We have some experience with that, good and bad, I must confess, but it would be nice to have some guidance on that. So what I would hope for is that the meeting of the party sticks to this issue, goes on with it, and tries to develop some type of recommendations, good practice, whatever, to help us, being an affected state or being a country of origin, to have better procedures in the future. Thank you very much.
Andreas, for this short and very precise presentation. I think that expressing the view probably of the majority of us that we would all share your views, but the panel the floor will be open to the panel and to the audience subsequently to react on your presentation. I would like now to give the floor to the next speaker, Jorma Aurela from the Ministry of Employment and Economy of Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and ladies and gentlemen. We have had in Finland 4 processes during the last 5 years where we had 3 nuclear power plant projects, and then also, you could say, the first final repository for the spent fuel. There it was an enlargement for the new Olkiluoto 4 power plant. And we have gone through all these Espoo processes. They are not even stopped, of course, now, because the final decision will be the construction license. And as you know, our parliament finally ratified last summer Olkiluoto 4, so that it got the political license, and also Fennovoima. Loviisa 3 was not accepted. And then, of course, Finland has been as an affected party also in some projects in the neighboring country. I will try to illustrate some phenomena, for instance, the same ones which Andreas just told us, and the problems and questions which are important here. The language question is always interesting. We have to translate our material to 9 languages. It's very good that the Baltic Rim includes Germany, because then we could have the material for Austria also. Because Austria took part in all these 3 nuclear power plant projects. And I have to say, really, I think that Austria is the conscience or the quality control grants in Europe for these projects. They are having very high-skilled experts, and these discussions are really fruitful, because we really had these Article 5 consultations in all these 3 cases, and they were really interesting. Then, of course, we also got specific questions for several countries. You see the list, and most of them are always concentrating in the severe accidents. And this is also now a question in our country, because we chose, you could say, coming from our Nuclear Energy Act and the rules, we chose that this 100 terabecquerel is the accident we are going through. I mean that it's a cesium 137. And now after Fukushima, of course, you can ask that is that sufficient? But of course, you have to take into account that we are now talking about new power plants, where the, you could say, design basis accident and even beyond that is taken into account. And for instance, the first power plant with a core catcher really coming into operation maybe 2013 is Olkiluoto 3. I mean that the accident is different than from the existing plants. And that was, of course, the case with Olkiluoto 4 and Fennovoima. But still, we are going to think about this in the future. Here you see this site of Olkiluoto. You see the 2 existing plants, and one in construction, Olkiluoto 3, is in the right, and then this proposed Olkiluoto 4, which has now this political license. And now this final decision is then going to be the construction license maybe in three years. And for instance, in these cases, we go on, for instance, with Austria, so that we are always sending these decisions to Austria. We just found out that we have not sent 2 of them, but we are going to do it next week. Okay, then about these special features in these questions, it is important to cover whole lifetime of these facilities, and then we have to discuss also the waste questions, and the whole site must be taken into account. The cooling water is always the most important question in, you could say, national environmental impact assessment, but of course, when we are talking about the Espoo process, then it is the accidents, severe accidents. And as I said, we chose our way, but we are going to see what is going to be the development with other countries. And then I have to comment what Andreas said about this, you could say, how deep you should go in the plant-specific questions. That is a problem in our case, for instance, because we have few alternatives, and in fact, by the way, it is now so that a power company cannot choose outside these plant possibilities which they have had in the environmental impact assessment, but in the old days they thought that they could do that. Then we have some new phenomena, and we don't know how it will happen. For instance, in our case, after we have perhaps granted the construction licenses, because then, according to the Aarhus Convention, there will be possible appealing processes, and it's very interesting to see how they are going to proceed. We could ask, are these some processes overlapping each other? And for instance, I don't know how many of you know this Euratom Treaty, Article 37, which is meant for the waste treatment and the possible consequences and contamination for other countries. Some countries, they have asked that it should be broadened and made more specific, but for instance, here we have some criticism from Finland that we still have this Espoo process, and then finally, you could say Aarhus Convention processes. I think that is enough. And then in Europe we have this Natura, which is of course very important, and in our case it has been always parallel to these Espoo processes. But still, we have found out that these are very powerful tools, and they are fruitful, and we are going to continue development of these processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorma, for your presentation. I hope that the good practice that you have established with Austria will be followed also by other Espoo countries. I would like now to give the floor to the next speaker, Monsieur Jean-Luc Lachaume, Deputy Director-General of the Nuclear Safety Authority in France.
Merci.
Vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just say a few words, indeed, on the application of the Espoo Convention, specifically for nuclear facilities and how we see things in France. So I represent the French Nuclear Safety Authority here. This is the authority responsible for regulation and monitoring of all nuclear facilities in France. That is to say, it covers electricity generation, but also facilities for medical and industrial applications which use any radioactive sources. With respect to the application of the Espoo Convention, there is a general provision in France because this convention was in fact transposed into our domestic legislation. It is part of our environmental law, and therefore, in keeping with the convention, it is stipulated that when a project is planned that may have an environmental impact on a neighboring country, that neighboring country has to be notified and consulted. Sufficient time must be left so as to ensure that this consultation can indeed take place. and so as to ensure that the outcome of these consultations can be taken into consideration. Our environmental law specifies that the outcome of these consultations must indeed be taken into consideration. In France, when there is a major project that is planned and that may have significant adverse transboundary impacts, there are special procedures that must be followed, in particular a public inquiry before any decision is made. And this public inquiry entails a consultation of the public with respect to the project. In the information that is given to the public, that is to say to any citizen, there's not only the environment, the impact assessment, but also the safety report and a file relating to risk control, which explains how we might face any risk of accident. With respect to the implementation of the Espoo Convention in the case of nuclear facilities, we specifically apply the Espoo Convention to the nuclear facilities which might cause an adverse transboundary impact. And these are in particular significant adverse transboundary impact. Of course, here words are of importance. We have to define what adverse impacts means with respect to transboundary events. Within the Espoo Convention, there is no definition of an accident, and so accidents are in fact not covered by the Espoo Convention. At least that is the position of the French authorities. Now, if I look at what this might mean for a nuclear power plant under construction in France, we've had a recent example with a nuclear power plant in Flamanville. It is a third generation EPR type reactor under construction in Normandy. Now, Normandy, I think you can situate it on a map. It's on the west, in the west of France, on the Channel. A public inquiry was held amongst the public within a 10-kilometer radius from the plant site. And the reason for this is that we have safety provisions in place today to ensure that any accident situation with a core meltdown are practically ruled out. And if they were to occur, this would not entail any safety measures that would have to be taken to protect the population around the facility. This is a position that is held not just by France, by the way. It is also the view of the European safety authorities, which met within the WENRA club and which set out criteria and objectives relating to third-generation reactors. Now, to conclude, I would like to specify that France's position isn't that restrictive with respect to accidents. And in the case of the public inquiry relating to Flamanville and the notifications given to neighboring countries, around the Flamanville reactor, there are the Jersey Islands. These are British islands. And even though this is beyond, their distance is beyond the radius of the public inquiry that was held, we nevertheless transferred to the British authority the full public inquiry file. That is to say, not only the environmental impact assessment, but also all the documents relating to the response to any possible accidents and the view of the safety authorities. Thank you. Chair, thank you for this presentation. In France, you are, of course, the champions of nuclear power in Europe, and it is true that the expectations of the public in France and in Europe with respect to environmental impact in France and the safety of nuclear facilities are quite high.
Floor to the next speaker, Ms. Rita Mazzanti, who is the head of the Liaison office in Geneva of the International Atomic Energy Agency. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to briefly inform you on the discussion taking place now in Vienna, where member state of the agency, the 151 member states, gather on Monday for a 5-day conference, ministerial conference on nuclear safety, aimed at paving the way of a post-Fukushima nuclear safety framework based on the lesson learned from that accident. In his address to the conference, the Director-General, Mr. Yukiya Amano, focused on 5 key areas which might contribute to establish an enhanced nuclear framework, nuclear safety framework. These include stronger IAEA safety standards, more frequent safety reviews at nuclear installation that you also mentioned, more independent national regulatory regulation, enhance and disseminate information to include providing analysis and possible scenarios on how the crisis might develop and the associated radiological impact. We all know that the public confidence in the safety of nuclear power has been shaken after the accident. However, nuclear power will remain an important, important for many countries, and so it is imperative that the most stringent safety measures are implemented worldwide. And this is also true for countries opting to phase out their nuclear power programs, whose plans will continue to operate for many years. As nuclear accidents respect no borders, it is really important that the international approach will be taken, this issue will be discussed at the international level. And as far as we are concerned, we believe that the IAEA safety standards are internationally agreed benchmark for what constitutes a high level of safety for protecting people and the environment. Of course, standards alone that you know are not compulsory are not enough. So implementation is the key. Because even the best safety standards are useless unless they're actually implemented. And it, of course, will be necessary to systematically and regularly review the safety of all the nuclear power plants. Another issue that should be addressed is thorough and transparent national risk assessment to all power plants in the world. So if problems are found, appropriate action should be taken. National assessments are the starting point, but they should be followed by by IAEA international expert peer reviews. The report or recommendation of peer review missions should be made available to all member states of the International Atomic Energy Agency. There must also be a following mission to ensure that recommendations are implemented. As I mentioned before, national regulatory bodies play a crucial role in ensuring nuclear safety. Therefore, regulators should be independent, adequately funded, and staffed with well-trained personnel. Mechanisms for responding to and managing a nuclear incident need to be enhanced, both within countries, at regional and international level. Nuclear safety will remain, is still responsibility of states, but international organizations such the International Atomic Energy Agency will play a leading role in shaping a safer nuclear future at the international level.
Thank you very much, Rita, for this reassuring conclusion of your presentation. I think that one thing are the safety standards, and the other thing is their credibility and the way they are implemented. And Rita correctly pointed out that the implementation and the monitoring is extremely important in that respect. As the first panel is now completed, I would give the floor to the panelists of the first panel to react very, very shortly on the interventions of the others, if they so wish. If not, we can move to the second panel. So the floor is yours. Oui, Monsieur Lachaume. Voilà.
Oui, juste effectivement.
Yes, indeed. I spoke in full cognizance of the fact that we are here in the context of the Espoo Convention, so I said what we thought of the Espoo Convention, but it is clear today that in the context of the Fukushima events, we're dealing with a changed landscape, and we fully support what was just said by our colleague from the IAEA. We fully support what is being done and indeed what is being done this week within the IAEA, and which we believe is going in the right direction. I can add to this that at the European level, we obviously have joined the stress tests, and we have initiated stress tests in France, not only on the reactors, but all other nuclear facilities, fuel production sites, reprocessing sites, research reactors, and so on. So this is not at all just a pro forma exercise. We will indeed investigate the substance of the matter in depth to verify what nuclear facilities can resist and what happens, what might happen if there should be any accident. These stress tests are being carried out in a completely transparent fashion. That is to say, in France, it is not only the official nuclear experts who are involved, but also representatives from civil society and NGOs who have been allowed to participate in the stress tests. There are also colleagues from neighboring countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, and Switzerland, that have been invited to join. And the full results at every stage of the test will be made fully public, and this includes the reports underway and the completed ones. The Chair, thank you for this clarification.
You wanted to take the floor, and then Andreas. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Andreas first.
2 points. One, I would deepen a little bit what I said before regarding severe accidents. Yes, the new designs, the so-called Generation 3 designs, if they will fulfill the promise they have, will be much, much safer than what we have at the moment in the market, no doubt about that. And there's a lot of talk about limited impact criteria, which are a very nice thing, but most of them have a probabilistic cutoff, and that's the problem. I mean, for a number of years, we would have been inclined to accept that, but in particular, with the lesson of Fukushima, we will not accept, from our point of view, not accept any probabilistic cutoff criteria. If a designer can prove deterministically that he made some kind of limited impact criteria, fine, then we will believe it. Or if there is a strict national regulation or something like that. But as long as there's something like, it's limited by that, but with a probability of 10 to minus something, we'll say, but we could be affected. Because probabilistic is a very tricky thing, and just Fukushima showed that don't believe the numbers. It's a very good instrument for analyzing nuclear plants, but it's a different story. But in terms of environmental impact, we were very, very cautious on that. And the other thing is, not only Fukushima and the European stress test, but all other developments will lead to improvements in the existing plants. This is one of, so to say, the major credos of nuclear regulators and operators, continuously improve nuclear safety. The question is, in terms of environmental impact assessments, of the quote-unquote major changes. Do we introduce that concept, which would then require a new, as Jorma said, an environmental impact assessment? This is valid for all times. But what is the threshold when we need a new one? Is it just a power upgrade? Is it a major safety improvement? Is it other major investment, etc., etc.? Again, there is practically no guidance. Some do it this way, some do it that way, and we have a lot of informed discussion on that, but no real guidance how to deal with it. Thank you.
This is a very interesting description of the so-called precautionary principle in the environmental policy. Jorma.
Okay, I would also have some points to the same questions. But first, for instance, when we in Finland are now, you could say, continuing our projects, and when we started also our stress tests for the old units, operating units, we noticed that, for instance, the general public and the politicians, they are not aware of the differences between the old and the new ones. And that is something you have to stress, you could say all the time, that, for instance, these new designs are not going to need any, you could say, major changes. I would say that Fukushima changed so much that there will be very many smaller things and important things to prevent this kind of disaster, but they are not going to change, for instance, the economics of nuclear power. But this is only, you could say, a personal opinion. But also Andreas took this question of thresholds. And when you have to go through this Espoo process, which is a long one, because I always think that it is not going to stop after this, you could say, having the first license, because, for instance, in our case, it is only stopped when you have the second license, which is the construction license. Then you have to, according to our law, you have to report what you have done also in the Espoo process. But I could take, for instance, as an example, these disposal of low-level and medium-level waste, the repositories, because you could say to have really transboundary consequences from those is quite difficult to explain for general public and for anyone. So these threshold questions, they still need to be discussed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorma. Rita, you want to add something?
No, thank you.
Okay. The point I wanted to make is that in Fukushima, we had for the first time an earthquake with a tsunami and a human factor element. When we had discussion in my home country, Greece, where we have exactly the same approach as in Austria, and I was explaining a few years ago that in Japan, where the seismicity is higher than in Greece, they managed to have nuclear energy plants, and that therefore, in my opinion, the only real issue was the radioactive waste and how they could be managed, and the possible idea that I had expressed at the time was to establish a new agency. We have a proliferation of agencies within the European Union to take care of the radioactive waste, which was indeed an idea to do this under the best available technologies and guarantees that the European Union could provide. That was some time ago, and this didn't take into consideration the three elements that I mentioned before in Fukushima. I would also say that third-generation nuclear power plants, that is really fine. It's, disons, le dernier cri du développement technologique, if I can say it so, but very often the devil is in the details, and the more advanced the technology is, the more details and more devils you could have. A last point, there is now a growing interest on the exploration of shale gas, including in Europe. The United States did this a lot. Shale gas in the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, or in the Mediterranean, in particular in the Mediterranean, that is a seismic region, could lead to earthquakes and possibly to tsunamis. So again, this is another element which is good in the sense that shale gas could compensate energy, could provide energy production, supposing we slow down the development of the nuclear, but again, it could create new risks under the precautionary principle that should be assessed.